Thailand was an ally of Japan during World War II. This wasn't a voluntary alliance. Japan had invaded southern Thailand for easier access to British Malay and Burma. After a few days of fighting, the Thai king realized fighting was pointless and cut a deal with the Japanese to join the winning side. American special forces arrived in Burma to harass Japanese troops in Burma and Thailand, and to supply Chinese nationalist troops that fought in the region to maintain road access to Indian and Burmese ports. The United States did not object when Japan invaded northern China in 1931. 6 years later, Japan began an invasion of all of China and blockaded the coast. This halted the massive British-American opium trade and other ventures that existed for centuries. See the short video below, Protecting the American Opium Trade. This prompted outrage from the American government. President Franklin Roosevelt covertly sent military aid to China in direct violation of the Neutrality Act. Nationalist Chinese generals were mostly businessmen who amassed great fortunes, and much came from opium. They shifted opium growing across the border into Burma, Laos, and Thailand, but the Japanese cut off the Burma Road in 1940, which provided the only access to the sea. British and American forces were tasked with reopening this route by fighting Japanese forces in difficult jungle terrain. By 1943, Chinese nationalist generals knew the Americans advancing in the Pacific would win the war, so they avoided major battles with the Japanese while selling American aid for personal profit. American General Joseph Stilwell was furious about their corruption and lack of enthusiasm to fight. As American forces fought difficult battles in the Pacific, many American generals objected to sending thousands of American troops and massive aid to Burma. A huge construction project to build a new 1,000-mile Ledo Road to China made no sense to generals. They knew nothing of the opium trade and thought the Japanese in these distant jungles should be left to rot, as that region had no strategic or economic value. Yet the effort continued, probably at the insistence of wealthy opium traders in London and New England.
Once more, the trucks get ready to roll towards Chongqing. American engineers, headed by Brigadier General Lewis A. Pick on the right, have, by sheer dogged determination, forged the last link connecting the hard-fighting Chinese with desperately needed supplies. Pick's Pike, the stretch of newly opened route between Wanting on the Burma Road in China and Ledo in Burma, has been named after General Pick, who said when the project seemed hopelessly defeated, the road is going to be built, mud, rain, and malaria be damned. And now, the impossible accomplished, the vital supplies go through.
American military officers in Burma were aware of the opium trade and the huge profits it generated. Some became involved in opium transport to create slush funds to support their military effort and their net worth. After the war, American supplies continued to support the nationalists as they attempted to reclaim all of China. However, the communists led by Mao Zedong were more popular with the people and dedicated to their cause. They crushed the nationalists by 1949 and sent them fleeing to the island of Formosa, now known as Taiwan. See the short video link below. Some defeated nationalist Chinese forces settled in northern Burma, Thailand, and Laos, where they expanded opium growing into a huge area that became known as the Golden Triangle. President Harry S. Truman helped transform the wartime OSS into a permanent government department known as the CIA in 1947. Without massive American wartime budgets, the newly established CIA wanted other sources of funding, and the opium trade could help. As a result, the CIA quickly organized its first coup by overthrowing the government of Thailand that same year. Friendly Thai generals were paid by the CIA to crush a democracy movement and reinstall a monarch, who was promptly shot in bed. By 1951, The CIA's favorite general, Phao Siyanon, shown here, became director of Thailand's 40,000-man national police force and earned millions of dollars from the CIA over the next decade to control the opium trade. Phao was a brutal dictator who assassinated and arrested all political opponents. He was succeeded by Field Marshal Thanom Kittikachorn, who oversaw another decade of military rule in Thailand from 1963 to 1973, as Thailand functioned as an American colony whose army was expanded and equipped to provide troops for the American military. Over 40,000 Thai soldiers served in South Vietnam, with 351 killed in action and 1,358 wounded. Thailand's colonial status is evidenced by this U.S. Army big picture propaganda video, linked below, that praised this nation ruled by a harsh dictator.
The country's location, almost completely surrounded by nations which have known independence for only a few years, makes it a key area in a peninsula threatened by communism. Thailand is a member of SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, whose headquarters are in Bangkok. Her consistent support of the free world has contributed greatly to the strength of the free world's position throughout Asia. The Royal Thai Army boasts some of the best trained soldiers not only of Asia, but the world. All males are required to register for the military service at the age of 18, a military conscription program similar to that of the United States. From this pool of manpower, the Thais have been able to construct an efficient, diversified military force. Thailand has an unexcelled record of devotion to the cause of freedom, extending back to World War I. Within 2 days of the outbreak of hostilities in Korea, Thailand had announced her intention of supporting the United Nations efforts in that country. The capital city of Bangkok is today a center for many United Nations activities in Southeast Asia.
At the height of the Vietnam War, almost 50,000 American military personnel were stationed in Thailand, mainly airmen at major air bases. The U.S. Army had a large presence to ensure security and to train and equip the Thai Army. Around 80% of all U.S. Air Force bombings of North Vietnam and Laos originated from air bases in Thailand. At its peak in 1969, more American airmen were serving in Thailand than in South Vietnam. The Vietnam War provided a massive boost to the opium trade. 500,000 GIs in the region provided thousands of new customers. Cash profits were so great that the CIA established its own bank in Australia to launder money, called Nguyen Hand. See the short video below about Yamashita's gold. Anyone with doubts about major American involvement in the Indochina opium trade is welcome to listen to retired American Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel Bo Gritz.
Welcome back to this special edition of Midday. We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Bo Gritz, retired from the United States Army Special Forces. Now, Colonel, before we went into the break, you started talking about how drug money was being utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency, i.e. Air America, at the time during Southeast Asia to fund assassination teams. Now, are you trying to tell me that the United States government is actually involved in drug smuggling?
That's precisely what I'm saying. The proof is, I was asked by the White House, the Vice President's office, to go into the Golden Triangle. I was the first U.S. agent ever to go in and come out alive from the inner sanctum of General Kun Sa, most heinous drug criminal the world's ever known. He pumped 3,050 tons of opiates into the free world last year. And when I got in there, he revealed the names of U.S. government officials who he said had been his best customer for more than 20 years. Well, with George Bush at that time leading the charge in the war on drugs, I thought we'd get an attaboy because we're going to reveal human sewage in our bureaucracy can be flushed. We'll have clean government. Hooray! I couldn't have been more wrong. The sky literally fell on me. When I came back with those names on videotape with Khoon Sa's own testimony, people watching this show can see the videotapes for themselves, I was told to erase and forget, or I would hurt the government.
In 1973, Thai students began protests against the massive American military presence and the war in Indochina. Thai leaders were concerned about this unrest and the American withdrawal from South Vietnam that resulted in a huge reduction in American military spending in Thailand and direct aid. After the fall of both Cambodia and South Vietnam in April 1975, the political climate between Thailand and the United States soured. That same month, Cambodian troops seized the American merchant ship SS Mayaguez that was inexplicitly sailing just 2 miles from a Cambodian island. The crew was thought to be held on that island, and American President Gerald Ford ordered an immediate rescue attempt. The quickest option was to launch a long-range helicopter assault from bases in Thailand. A request was made to launch the attack from Thailand, but this was rejected as the Thais wanted no conflict with the new government in Cambodia. The Americans launched the operation anyway. That became a disaster. See the short video link below. Immediately after the news broke of the use of Thai bases to support the Mayaguez rescue, the Thai government lodged a formal protest and riots broke out outside the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok. The Thai government ordered the U.S. military out of Thailand by the end of the year. The opium supply from Laos was disrupted by a communist takeover in 1975, while the market to American troops in Indochina disappeared. American and British opium lords foresaw this threat and expanded their opium imports from Iran and Afghanistan to establish the Golden Crescent. Thailand had become less important to them and the U.S. military, so efforts to maintain American control lessened. The American CIA still has strong influence in Thailand, but not the total control that existed before 1975. Thailand has never established a strong democratic government and remains an unstable monarchy shaken by frequent military coups.